It all began with a disappearance. A young woman, full of life, full of stories, simply vanished. No signs, no clear clues, no body. But behind the silence, a suffocating truth was hidden. A macabre plot, with unlikely players, dark motives, and a cruelty that defies any rational explanation. When the name Bruno Fernandes, goalkeeper for Flamengo and idol of thousands, surfaced as the central figure in the mystery, the country came to a standstill. A celebrated athlete, now tied to a crime with no body, no answers, only deep and lasting scars. Today, you're going to learn the darkest details of this case. It's not just about aggravated murder. It's about power, impunity, perversion, and the weight of silence. Get ready, because the story you're about to hear might be more brutal than any fiction. Welcome to Urban Hauntings. Here we dive deep into mysteries, paranormal stories, and true crimes, always with a gripping and immersive approach. If you enjoy this kind of content, help support the channel. Like the video, comment your theories, share it with fellow lovers of the paranormal and true crime, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your engagement makes all the difference and helps us keep growing. Now, let's get into today's story. It was a quiet Friday, June 4th, 2010, when a 25-year-old woman passed through the gates of a remote ranch in Esmeraldas, Minas Gerais. Eliza Samudio went there holding on to fragile hope, to settle, peacefully, the issue of child support for her newborn son with goalkeeper Bruno Fernandes. What she didn't know was that this meeting would become her death sentence. From that point on, her whereabouts would become one of the greatest unsolved crimes in Brazil's history. According to the reports later gathered by authorities, the scene was one of silent horror. Eliza was allegedly held captive, closely watched by Bruno's trusted men, a kind of death squad, made up of loyal and twisted accomplices. What began as a promised agreement turned into a carefully laid trap. The eerie atmosphere of the ranch, surrounded by overgrown brush and distant neighbors, set the stage for the worst possible outcome. Days later, an anonymous call changed the course of the investigation. The tip-off mentioned an abandoned baby, the child of Eliza, left in a neighborhood in Ribeirão das Neves. The baby was dirty, terrified, and left in the care of strangers. Police acted quickly and rescued the child, who was soon identified as Bruninho, Eliza's son with Bruno. But the mother was still missing. With the tip and the child rescued, authorities launched a search operation. Bruno Fernandes immediately became the prime suspect, and the shiny surface of his fame began to crumble. Testimonies emerged. Witnesses spoke up. Disturbing details surfaced, including the involvement of a 17-year-old teenager who confessed to helping with the abduction and described how Eliza was tied up, beaten, and, according to him, strangled to death. What came next was even more horrifying. According to the teen, the body was dismembered and taken to a dog kennel. Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, known as Bola, a former military police officer and Bruno's partner, was allegedly the one who hid the remains beneath a concrete slab after feeding parts of the body to dogs. That was just the beginning of a story drenched in blood, silence, and cruelty, with no hope of turning back. It's not uncommon for viewers of this channel to ask for this story. It shows up again and again in comments, suggestions, and the morbid curiosity that surrounds cases marked by violence and fame. But honestly, this case, it hits differently, because it doesn't require much investigative effort. It's not a clever crime. It's raw. It's shallow. It's cruelty in its most banal form. The death of Eliza Samudio wasn't the result of a genius plan, a meticulous killer, or a complex criminal mind. It was about impulse, cowardice, misogyny, and sheer disregard for human life. The motive was petty, selfish, almost childish. A man who didn't want to face consequences and chose to erase the problem, as if a human life could be thrown away, as if killing was just a convenient solution. What's most disturbing is that it was premeditated. This wasn't a snap decision. It wasn't an isolated act. Other people were involved. A scene was built. A plan was executed. Tracks were covered. And even with all that, the outcome doesn't show cunning, only how evil can exist with zero emotional intelligence. Killing Eliza wasn't just a crime. It was silencing. It was cruelty for cruelty's sake. When I think about this case, I don't just see goalkeeper Bruno or tabloid headlines. I see a system that failed Eliza from the beginning. I see a cycle that pushed her to the margins and left her completely alone, Even in her most desperate hour, there was no one there to protect her, not even the law, when she cried for help. This case haunts me, because it didn't end with a conviction. It continues, in how we treat victims, in how some criminals are welcomed back into society like nothing happened, and in how women's lives are still treated as disposable. Eliza Samudio became a symbol, but before that she was a woman, and everything was taken from her. Eliza Silva Samudio was born on February 22, 1985, in Foz do Iguaçu. From the very beginning, her path seemed to be marked by abandonment and violence. Her mother, Sonia, was in an abusive relationship with Eliza's father, architect Luis Carlos Samudio. When Eliza was just 6 months old, Sonia fled, leaving the baby with him. The promise of a family was already broken before it even began. In her early years, Eliza was raised away from her mother. Maternal presence came in brief visits and short phone calls. At age 10, she spent a year with Sonia in Campo Grande, only to return to her father's care. Her mother was more of a ghost, on paper, but absent in every meaningful moment, a figure who would only return when it was already too late. As a teen, the desire to escape that suffocating environment grew stronger. At 18, Eliza left her hometown for São Paulo, dreaming of a modeling career. But dreams soon collided with harsh reality. With no connections, no support, and little money, she ended up in the adult entertainment industry, appearing in pornographic films under the name Fernanda Farias, and doing sensual photo shoots. To many, this choice would later be used to dehumanize her. Even so, Eliza never stopped trying to change her life. She did runway shows, sought jobs as a photo model, and kept chasing something greater. But the version of her story that society wanted to tell was different. The troubled woman, the former call girl, as if any of that justified what happened, as if her mistakes or choices canceled out her right to live. What few knew was that behind the controversial image was a young woman scarred by family dysfunction, abuse, and choices made out of survival. Eliza wasn't a police case. She was the portrait of someone trying, desperately, to break free from trauma. And in the end, she was judged more for her past than for the brutal crime she endured. Amid emotional chaos, legal battles, and threats, Eliza Samudio gave birth to her son. It was February 10, 2010, and the child was born far from the father, in São Paulo, at a friend's house who had taken Eliza in since her pregnancy began. The baby was registered without a father because Bruno Fernandes refused to acknowledge paternity. He claimed Eliza was trying to trap him with a baby scam. He never accepted that child as his. Even with rejection, Eliza didn't give up. She went to court, demanding child support and official recognition of paternity. She knew this could damage the goalkeeper's image, and that, precisely, lit the fuse of a quiet fury, one that had been simmering since the moment she refused to abort. The child, to Bruno, was a liability, a threat, and in the world of fame, unwanted children become risks. During the first few months, little Bruninho lived in silence alongside his mother, sometimes staying in friends' houses, other times in hotel rooms paid for by Bruno. The goalkeeper covered the expenses, but kept his distance. Then, in early June, Eliza accepted an invitation from Bruno to meet him at a ranch in Esmeraldas, Minas Gerais. According to her legal team, the trip seemed like an attempt at reconciliation, maybe an informal agreement, maybe even a truce. But what awaited her was a premeditated plan. After Eliza disappeared, something unimaginable happened. The child was abandoned in a poor community in Ribeirão das Neves. An anonymous tip led police to the scene. Bruninho was alone, too small to cry out for help, but old enough to carry the invisible scar of a tragedy. He was rescued, cleaned, fed, and immediately placed in the care of the justice system. DNA tests confirmed without a doubt the baby was the biological son of Eliza Samudio and Bruno Fernandes. From that moment on, her disappearance took on a far more serious tone. This was no longer just a missing woman. It was the trace of a family torn apart, and the beginning of an investigation that would slowly unravel the horrors buried on that ranch, and the innocents discarded like trash in the form of a baby left behind. No murder plan unfolds in isolation. In the case of Eliza Samudio, what's most disturbing isn't just the killing itself, it's how many people were involved. Bruno Fernandes, the most visible face in the scandal, didn't act alone. Around him was a trusted circle made up of accomplices, close friends, even family members. Together they built a cruel system that enabled the kidnapping, imprisonment, and concealment of a body. Luis Henrique Romão, known as Macaron, was Bruno's right hand. A longtime friend, fiercely loyal, a silent executor. He was the one who accompanied Eliza at key moments, transported her, monitored her, silenced her. His role was not just complicit, it was active, strategic. His devotion to Bruno bordered on worship. What looked like friendship was actually a cog in the machinery of death. Then came Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, the infamous Bola, a former civil police officer with a dark past and a reputation for being dangerous. According to the most gruesome parts of the investigation, he was the one who struck the final blow. He strangled Eliza with his bare hands, then dismembered her body, brought the remains to his kennel, and, according to the indictment, fed parts of the corpse to Rottweiler dogs. The sadism of that scene is hard to describe without flinching, and beyond them, others hovered around the story. Drivers, teenagers, ex-girlfriends, even Bruno's wife, Diane, was named. Some helped hide the baby. Others provided logistics. There were those who knew and stayed silent, those who feared, those in debt, and those who were simply caught up in a web of emotional manipulation and financial control. In the end, it was like a soccer team of cruelty, as some news outlets called it. What's most unsettling is the question that lingers unanswered. Why? Why did so many people get involved in something so brutal, so senseless, so vile? What pushed them to cross the moral line? Was it fear, money, blind loyalty? Or was there, as Bruno himself once suggested, something much darker within them all? Something that fame, football, and money merely disguised. Crimes like Eliza Samudio's awaken something deep in the collective psyche. A mix of horror, disbelief, and an unease that doesn't go away. Because really, what drives a person, or an entire group, to plan and carry out such a calculated murder? This wasn't a moment of rage, an impulse. It was a conscious plan, with stages, roles, and a whole network of silence. Something monstrous, and at the same time, painfully banal in its motive. Brazil has seen other crimes marked by this same lack of empathy. Suzanne von Richthofen, who orchestrated her parents' murder. The Nardoni couple, accused of killing their young daughter Isabella. In all these cases, there's a common thread: coldness, the ability to look at another human being, often someone close, and treat them as disposable, as an obstacle, a stain, a nuisance to be erased. But Eliza's case carries something even more cruel: the weight of silence. For years, she was ignored, discredited, humiliated. When she reported abuse, she was called a liar. When she sought legal protection, she was dismissed for not having a stable relationship. Even the Maria de Penha law was denied to her. In the end, her murder was treated by many as the predictable outcome of someone who had pushed too far. A collective failure in judgment. It's hard to talk about this case without confronting how criminals are shaped. Bruno grew up in an unstable home, surrounded by violence and emotional neglect. But that doesn't explain or excuse what he did. This wasn't just the product of a broken childhood. It was a choice enabled by a permissive environment that normalizes the objectification of women and often forgives powerful men. The goalkeeper acted with brutality and the confidence that he'd get away with it. At its core, the Eliza Samudio case is more than just a story of murder. It's a mirror, a reflection of how society continues to fail women, fails to hear them, fails to act before it's too late. Eliza was silenced, and silencing women is a crime that starts long before death. It begins the moment we stop believing them, and it ends when no help can reach them. Eliza Samudio wasn't just murdered in a barbaric crime. She was, even before that, destroyed by an entire system that failed her at every stage of life. Since childhood, her name was tied to pain, abandonment, and violence. Rejected by her mother, then by her father, she lived in homes where protection was a promise never fulfilled. By 10, she understood absence. By 18, she understood what it meant to survive alone. Her teenage years were marked by a desperate search for a better future and the harsh reality of a city like São Paulo. With no support system, she fell into a cycle of exploitation. She became a sex worker, posed nude, worked in porn, and instead of viewing those choices as part of a survival journey, society used them to dismiss her pain. When she cried for help, people pointed to her past, as if women like her don't deserve justice. When she reported the first assaults by Bruno, Eliza was met with indifference by authorities. The judge who evaluated her request for a restraining order rejected it, saying her relationship with the goalkeeper wasn't stable enough to qualify under the Maria da Pena law. Even 5 months pregnant, the legal system turned its back. It was as if she was always in the wrong, as if no matter what she said, no one would listen. What's most heartbreaking is how Eliza, even without realizing it, repeated the very pattern that had shaped her life: violence as a form of affection. She was raised in instability, abuse, and abandonment, elements that surrounded her until the very end. Later, it was revealed that her biological father, who fought for custody of her son, had once been accused of sexually abusing her when she was just a child. The cycle closed in the cruelest way. Eliza trusted Bruno because she wanted to rebuild. She wanted dialogue. She wanted dignity. She went to that ranch believing in the possibility of an agreement, and she never came back. She was the victim of a crime, yes, but more than that, she was the victim of a society that chose to ignore her. And when a woman is silenced enough times, her death becomes just another detail in a system that's already rotten to the core. Bruno Fernandes' ranch in Esmeraldas, Minas Gerais, looked like the retreat of a successful athlete. Gated entrance, dense brush, total privacy. But behind that polished exterior was a stage of terror. It was there, according to investigators, that Eliza Samudio spent her final days, locked away, isolated, watched by men she barely knew, in a place where any cry for help would be swallowed by distance and by complicity. The trip to the ranch took place on June 4, 2010. Eliza had been convinced that she could negotiate child support. She arrived believing in dialogue, and left, if she left at all, as the victim of a silent abduction. According to a teenage accomplice, she was tied up, beaten, and had a gun pointed at her head. Then she was handed over to Bola, the executioner of this story. From that moment on, only silence. For days, there was nothing. No police report. No unusual movement. It was an anonymous tip that alerted authorities about a baby found in suspicious conditions. The child was discovered in Ribeirão das Neves, far from his mother, abandoned in a favela. Police rescued the boy, and suddenly all alarms went off. Where was Eliza? Why was her baby there? Who left him like that? The investigation quickly turned toward Bruno. The goalkeeper tried to maintain his innocence, claiming Eliza had left of her own free will, leaving the baby with someone she trusted. But the evidence screamed otherwise. Deleted messages, conflicting witness statements, testimonies leaking like cracks in a poorly built wall. Something was clearly, deeply wrong. Following the tip, police began searching Bruno's ranch. They combed through every inch, looked for any trace, found silence, but they also found signs of unusual activity. One by one, names of accomplices began to surface, and at the center of the storm, Bruno started to sink. The smile of a champion athlete faded under the weight of what would soon be revealed. A crime with no body, but filled with traces of cruelty that even time couldn't erase. In early July 2010, the mask began to slip. A 17-year-old teenager, Bruno's cousin, was taken into custody and brought to the homicide division in Barra da Tijuca, Rio de Janeiro. What he confessed in a 4-page statement wasn't just serious, it was deeply disturbing. He admitted to helping abduct Eliza Samudio, assaulting her with the butt of a gun, and witnessing her final breath in the hands of a man known as Bola. According to the teen, Eliza was taken by force to a house, some sort of hideout in Vespasiano. There, her arms were tied with rope. She was surrounded, alone, defenseless. Bola, the ex-cop known for his brutality, was allegedly the executioner. He strangled Eliza in front of everyone, and once it was over, he told them to leave. Left alone with the body, he headed to the kennel, where the horror would reach an unimaginable level. The teenager said Eliza's body was dismembered, parts placed in a bag. One of her hands was thrown to the Rottweilers, dogs trained to kill. After that, her remains were buried under concrete. The account was so grotesque it sounded like a horror movie, but it was real, and it came from someone who was there, who saw it, who carried the weight of the crime with his own hands. With that testimony, the investigation accelerated. Warrants were issued, accomplices interrogated, and the puzzle began to take shape. Police discovered that Bola had a criminal history, kept vicious dogs on the property, and that the house where the execution allegedly took place was a decoy, isolated, strategically chosen, a place where no one would hear the screams. where death could happen, in silence. But even with these revelations, one key element was still missing: the body. Without it, the case remained a no-body homicide, which made formal prosecution more difficult. Still, the consistency of the testimonies, the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, and the timeline of events made denial impossible. Eliza Samudio was dead, and those involved knew exactly what they had done. The horror was finally exposed. On July 7, 2010, the court issued an order for the preventive arrest of Bruno Fernandes and 7 other individuals involved in Eliza's disappearance and likely murder. The decision struck like lightning, shaking the world of sports and leaving the nation stunned. Up to that point, Bruno was still viewed by many as an idol, someone above suspicion. But the mask was coming off, and what lay beneath was terrifying. Bruno turned himself into police in Rio de Janeiro, alongside Luis Henrique Romão, also known as Macarão. Both were initially taken to the Polinter facility in Andaraí, then transferred to the Jerichino prison complex in Bangu. Shortly afterward, the Minas Gerais court requested their immediate transfer to the state, where the main investigation would take place. The justice system was finally moving, though far too late for Eliza. With the arrests, Bruno's image collapsed. Flamengo immediately suspended his contract and ceased all payments. Sportswear sponsor Olympiacos cut ties. On July 15th, he was officially fired for cause. The goalkeeper who once dazzled fans with miraculous saves was now a tabloid headline, charged with aggravated homicide, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and concealment of a corpse. The investigation pushed forward. Bruno, Macarão, Bola, and other accomplices were transferred to the Nelson Hungria Penitentiary in Contagem, where they were held in isolation. No more contact between them. The silence was imposed not only for security, but also to break the pact of loyalty that had held them together. Each one now faced the weight of their own conscience, or lack thereof. All that remained was the trial. Public pressure mounted. Families demanded answers. And while Eliza's body still hadn't been found, the nation cried out for justice, for the silenced woman, for the abandoned baby, for the truth that had to come to light, even if buried under concrete, fear, and lies. The fall of an idol was sealed, and there was no turning back. Eliza Samudio's body was never found, and that brutal absence is what turned the case into something even darker. Based on witness statements, police began a series of intensive searches: cadaver dogs, deep excavations, remote areas. One location kept coming up: a property connected to Bola in Vespasiano, in the metropolitan area of Belo Horizonte. It was believed that Eliza had been buried beneath concrete there. In one of the operations, authorities dug a massive hole, 15 meters wide, 10 meters long, 3 meters deep. The silence of the earth held the promise of answers. But all they found was garbage, worthless debris, nothing to confirm Eliza had ever been there. It was as if the body had been swallowed by impunity itself, and with every passing day, it became harder to separate truth from rumor, fact from cover-up. Another location mentioned was a site near the Confins International Airport, where Bruno's cousin, Jorge Rosa Sales, claimed to have helped bury the body. He said he witnessed the scene: Bola, Macarão, and himself, shoveling dirt over Eliza. But when police arrived, there was no grave. The leading theory: the body had been relocated, moved out of fear that Jorge might reveal too much. The missing body created a major legal dilemma. How do you convict someone of murder without a body? Prosecutors argued that the testimonies and circumstantial evidence were irrefutable. Defense attorneys clung to the absence. No body, no definitive proof of death. A desperate strategy, but a dangerous one. After all, the silence of the grave seemed to protect the guilty more than it honored the victim. But the absence didn't erase her memory. If anything, it made it louder. Every failed search, every fruitless excavation, every unanswered question deepened the horror. It was as if the earth itself was mourning, as if it refused to return what had been buried with such cruelty. Eliza Samudio's case didn't become infamous because of what was found. It became immortal because of what was lost forever. 2 years after Eliza's disappearance, on August 22, 2012, a new name splashed across the headlines: Sergio Rosa Sales, Bruno's cousin, and a key witness in the case. At just 24 years old, he was executed, shot 6 times in the neighborhood of Minaslandia, Belo Horizonte, while on his way to work. He tried to hide inside a house, but they found him, silenced him, killed him in cold blood. Sergio was one of the first to break the silence. He gave detailed statements, named names, described scenes. He confirmed that Eliza had been murdered by Bola and helped with the initial searches. But over time, he began to pull back, said he'd been threatened, pressured. He changed parts of his testimony. Fear crept into his routine, and fate did the rest. His murder happened in broad daylight, with all the signs of an execution. 2 men on a motorcycle, dark clothes, covered faces, no warning, no conversation, just bullets, just silence. The scene could have come from a conspiracy thriller, but it was real, and it sent a clear message. Those who talk, die. That warning wasn't just for Sergio, it was for everyone. The police never officially linked Sergio's death to the Eliza Samudio case, but the timing, the method, and the profile of the victim left little doubt. Witnesses began to fall silent. Fear spread like a plague, and the case, already difficult without the victim's body, now lost the voice of someone who had seen it all. One more crucial piece now buried without justice. With Sergio's death, the case took on an even deeper layer of mystery and impunity. It wasn't enough for Eliza to be erased. Now the witnesses were being eliminated too. The crime didn't stop. It evolved. It took new shapes. And with every life destroyed, the hole where the truth once lived grew deeper, darker, more unreachable. The trial of Bruno Fernandes and his accomplices began on November 19, 2012, in the Contagium Jury Court in Minas Gerais. The case that had already shocked the nation now unfolded like a public spectacle, a clash between justice and a crime without a body, between a fallen idol and a forgotten victim. But behind the scenes, the courtroom was filled with legal maneuvers, stalling tactics, and tense battles between prosecution and defense. On the first day, the lawyers representing Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, Bola, walked out of the courtroom in protest, claiming their client's defense was being restricted. Bola refused to accept a court-appointed lawyer, and his trial was postponed and split from the others. On the second day, Bruno tried to fire his entire legal team, a move that Judge Marixa Fabian Lopez Rodriguez interpreted as another attempt to delay the process. She denied the request and ordered the trial to proceed. The proceedings moved forward with co-defendants Luis Enrique Romo, Macarón, and Fernanda Gomez de Castro, Bruno's ex-girlfriend. On November 23rd, Macarón was sentenced to 15 years in prison for aggravated homicide. Fernanda received 5 years for her role in the crime. Bruno's trial, however, was pushed to March 2013 after another request from his defense team. Yet another desperate chapter in a long line of efforts to escape conviction. Finally, on March 4, 2013, Bruno Fernandes went to trial. Days of tension followed. Testimonies, cross-examinations, confirmations, and emotional confrontations. On March 8th, the verdict was announced. 17 years and 6 months in a closed regime for triple qualified homicide. 3 years and 3 months in an open regime for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, and 1 year and 6 months for concealing a corpse. Bruno's wife, Diane, was acquitted due to lack of direct evidence. The following month in April, Bola was sentenced. 22 years in prison, 19 in a closed regime for homicide, and 3 years for hiding the body. Even without a body, the crime was deemed materially proven. But for Eliza's family, no sentence would ever be enough. There was no grave, no farewell, no closure, just the bitter taste of incomplete justice. On March 10, 2017, Brazil was stunned by a decision from the Supreme Federal Court. Bruno Fernandes was released. The habeas corpus was granted by Justice Marco Aurelio Melo, who argued that Bruno could await appeal in freedom, since his case had not yet reached a second ruling. It felt like a slap in the face. The victim still had no grave, but the accused was back on the streets and back on the soccer field. Public outrage was immediate. Protests erupted across social media. Families of femicide victims spoke out. Social movements called it selective justice. Just months earlier, Bruno had been convicted of a heinous, premeditated, and cruel crime, without the body of his victim ever being recovered. And now, within days, he was being introduced, smiling, by a new club, Boa Esporte. The official presentation happened on March 14, 2017. Bruno put on the team jersey before the press. He tried to appear humble, but his silence said more than any words ever could. Boa Esport lost sponsors, faced intense backlash, and saw its reputation permanently damaged. Still, They stood by the signing, a club chasing media attention, while ignoring the blood still staining that name. On April 8th, Bruno returned to the pitch, a convicted murderer, cheered by part of the crowd, in scenes that seemed surreal. While Brazil struggled to fight femicide, a criminal was handed fame, spotlight, and a paycheck. To many, it was a mockery of Brazil's justice system. The pain of Eliza's mother, of the orphaned child, of millions of silenced women, turned into a sideshow. Bruno's freedom didn't last. On April 20th, 2017, the Supreme Court revoked his habeas corpus. Justices Alexandre de Moraes, Rosa Weber, and Louise Fuchs ordered Bruno's immediate return to prison. But the damage had already been done. The image of a country that imprisons only to release, that convicts only to later applaud, was more vivid than ever. And the Eliza Samudio case returned to the headlines once again for the wrong reasons. As the years went by, the justice that once seemed finally served began to unravel. On September 27, 2017, Bruno's sentence was reduced from 22 years and 3 months to 20 years and 9 months. The reason? The crime of concealing a body had expired. A technical detail, legally valid, but to the public, it felt like an insult. Eliza's body had never been found, yet somehow, time had expired the crime. That same decision affected Fernanda Gomes de Castro. Accused of aiding in Eliza and Bruninho's kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, her sentence was reduced from 5 years to 3, and converted into alternative penalties. As if time and bureaucracy had the power to erase the weight of the crime. As if legal decisions had begun, little by little, to bury the victim all over again. Meanwhile, others followed the same path. In October 2018, Macaron was granted parole after serving part of his sentence with good behavior. By March, he had already transitioned to open regime. The court ruled he had met the legal requirements. Time served. Head down, doors reopened. And Eliza? Still missing. No burial, no tombstone, no name on any official death record. The stream of appeals, delays, and leniency painted a cruel picture. Justice is not for the dead, it's for the living. And the longer time passes, the more the living learn to slip through the cracks. Lawyers maneuver, defendants wait, charges expire, and in the end, what should be punishment turns into progressive freedom. A bitter irony for those who once believed a sentence was the end of the story. Through it all, Eliza Samudio's name slowly disappeared. She stopped being news, stopped being remembered. She became the goalkeeper Bruno case, the victim, reduced to a footnote in her own murder. The name that should have echoed became a fading trace in the pages of justice. And once again, Brazil proved it knows how to forget, especially when the victim is a woman, poor, and shaped by a past society refuses to forgive. Any doubts about the true nature of Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, Bola, were erased on July 4, 2024. Already convicted for Eliza Samudio's murder, the former cop returned to prison for a crime committed before hers, the 2009 killing of Devanir Claudiano Alves. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Bola wasn't just an accomplice, he was a repeat killer. According to prosecutors, Bola had been hired to eliminate Devanir, who was allegedly involved with a businessman's wife. He executed the man with the same coldness he showed in Eliza's case. Silent, calculated, sadistic. In 2019, he and the client were convicted but allowed to remain free while appealing. In 2024, the cell doors closed again, far too late to erase the blood he had already spilled. This new conviction confirmed what many suspected all along. Bola's involvement in Eliza's death wasn't an accident or an exception. It was part of a method, a style of execution, a sinister profession. Bola wasn't just the hand behind a crime of passion. He was, in the shadows, a seasoned killer, a man who hid behind a police badge, but whose hands were already stained long before 2010. For years he denied everything, mocked investigators, smiled in court, claimed he was the target of a conspiracy. But truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, beneath concrete or behind a kennel, always finds a way to rise. And the 2024 conviction proved that nothing about his role in Eliza's murder was incidental. He was hired, he killed, and he moved on. Bola's legacy closes one of the darkest chapters in this story. It shows how evil, when left unchecked, grows. How violent men, protected by titles or powerful friends, continue to act. and how justice, even when delayed, sometimes returns to collect on old debts. But for Eliza, that justice came too late, and for many others, it may never come at all. As the defendants filed appeals, won parole and gave interviews, one child grew up without his mother and burdened with his father's last name. Bruninho, Eliza Samudio's son, was placed in the care of his maternal grandmother Sonia Moura, who has fought a quiet, determined battle ever since to give her grandson a life of dignity, away from cameras, away from judgment, and above all, far from the weight of Brazil's darkest true crime. But escaping the past was never easy. From a young age, Bruninho knew his mother had vanished. He knew his father was the man accused of planning the crime. And even without fully understanding, he carried in his documents, in the gaze of society, and in the irreversible absence of Eliza, the weight of a cruel narrative. To many, he was simply the son of goalkeeper Bruno. To others, he was the living reminder of a woman who fought until the very end. His grandmother, in rare interviews, spoke about the challenges of raising her grandson with love and protection. She spoke of the constant fear, of retaliation, of exposure, of trauma. She said she never told the boy all the details. She didn't want him to grow up filled with hate. She just wanted him to grow in peace, with dignity, with the chance to be his own person, not just a footnote in a crime he never chose to be part of. Over time, Bruninho's name faded from the headlines, and maybe that was a blessing, a refuge. A society so eager to expose eventually began to forget, but the pain remained. The void left by Eliza was filled with photos, stories, memories of a love that now lived only in the past, and a silence that never ended, because when a mother's body is never found, grief never finds closure. Today, Bruninho is the most powerful symbol of what's left behind, the only living link between victim and killer, a reminder that behind the headlines, there are real lives, scars that never show up in court records, and a legacy that should never be about fear, but about memory. Because forgetting Eliza means allowing crimes like this to happen again. And he, Bruninho, deserves to grow up in a world where his mother's name is remembered with justice. The Eliza Samudio case is more than a criminal file closed in courtrooms and archives. It's an open wound in the soul of Brazil, a reminder of how violence against women is often ignored until it's too late, of how fame can disguise monsters, and of how justice, no matter how hard it tries, can never give back what was taken. A life, a mother, an entire story. There was no full justice. There were convictions, yes, but also appeals, habeas corpus releases, reduced sentences, and time acting like an anesthetic. Her body was never found. The victim was buried twice, once in concrete perhaps, the other in forgetfulness. And while Brazil moves on to other scandals, Eliza remains where she's always been, silent, erased, blamed for daring to exist. Eliza was judged for her choices long before she was murdered, for the job she held, the clothes she wore, the people she loved, as if any of that justified what happened to her, as if deep down some lives are worth less than others. And that's what makes this case even more cruel. It doesn't just expose the killers. It reveals the cold eyes of a society that never really wanted to see her. How many Elizas are still out there, begging for help that no one wants to hear? How many women are silenced every day by men who believe they own their bodies, their choices, their very lives? Brazil cannot afford to forget, because every time a name like hers disappears from the news, it makes room for it all to happen again. And it will. It already is. Eliza Samudio is not just a name. She's a scream that echoes without sound, a reminder that delayed justice doesn't save lives, and that impunity smells like blood, wet cement, and cowardly silence. She never had the chance to defend herself, but her story, told without romanticism, without mercy, and without censorship, is the only weapon left to stop the tragedy from repeating. The case of Eliza Samudio is a story that never should have happened, but it did. It reflects a country that often fails to protect those who need it most, that doubts victims, glorifies abusers, and turns monsters into icons. A woman was erased, not only from real life but from public memory, but her name still beats, still demands answers, still deserves to be remembered. Bruno Fernandes returned to the field. Bola made headlines again for another murder. Macaron walks free. But Eliza never came back. She never had a proper funeral. She never had an ending. The crime with no body became a brutal symbol of how time can bury the truth, and at the same time keep it exposed forever. Her son grew up without a mother. The country moved on. But for those who lived through the pain, there's no such thing as moving on. There's only memory, resistance, and the hope that no other woman will ever meet the same fate. Eliza's silence still echoes, like a ghost that refuses to let us forget what we're capable of ignoring. And you, after everything you've just heard, do you really believe justice was served? If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you reflect, don't let it fade. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And above all, never forget the name Eliza Samudio. This is Urban Hauntings, where dark secrets are revealed, silence is broken, and every story leaves a mark. If you're into this kind of content, like, comment, share, and subscribe with the bell turned on. Your voice is what keeps us alive, even in the shadows.